Anything special? I think Mr. Smith this morning is a good opportunity. Mr. Smith can look back for quite a while, and since he's looking backward and we're all looking forward, we'll give him an opportunity to tell us about how cold it got in Yellowstone in the old days and a few things like that. If anybody care to hear, would anyone like to ask?
Want to make us sweat?
Reminiscences here this morning. We still got quite a little on the tape here yet. We just got to get it all on there this morning.
Maybe there isn't anyone interested in what an old fuddy-duddy might have to say.
Well, we can take a chance on it.
And then you get an old fellow started, maybe 10 minutes isn't time.
I still have more tapes back in the other one.
So I think we'd better say right now that we pick up right here again at, when, 1:30, Art?
Yeah.
And Art's going to have a meeting of the, what's the long name of that?
Oh, Management Improvement Committee, I believe.
So maybe we just better, I wonder if the mail is in yet.
Yes.
Maybe we'd better quit now, and that'll give Lorraine a chance to get our personal mail around, and then we'll meet right here again at 1:30 for whatever we do take up from then on. Is that all right? All right with you, Art?
Okay, yeah.
Well, let's adjourn recess now is a proper term, and meet right here again at 1:30. That'll give everybody a chance to transact a little business, maybe, and then I don't think the sessions will be too long this afternoon, and you can spend the rest of your afternoon trying to talk Kenny out of something. Okay. As I say, you fellows asked for it, so you'll have to take it. I was born in East Killingly, Connecticut, April 20th, 1882. So the secret is out. You know very well that I'm not going to be around here very much longer. And maybe I'd better say a few words here. I didn't prepare anything especially for this meeting, but I, of course, know what I've done all my life, and I may have a few notes here to jog my memory. But after high school, I spent several seasons, up to 1908. In the summers I spent in New Hampshire, in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and the winters I spent in Almond, Florida. That was Almond Beach. At that time, that was a great place for the automobile races. I saw Bonnie Oldfield race there, and I saw the stainless steamer, which looked like a cigar cut in two, make 2 miles in 59 seconds, which was faster than anybody had ever expected anything to go at that time. We never know what's going to start us off on our life's career. One thing which might have had quite an effect on my life was the fact that our school superintendent made a talk at our school, somewhere around 1900 probably, about Yellowstone Park. He was a man of means, and he had made a trip through Yellowstone Park that summer. This was in the fall, and he was full of Yellowstone Park, so he told us all about Yellowstone Park. And I remember he told that old chestnut about the Chinaman geyser, which was quite a story in those days and is still told. The story about the Chinaman geyser is that in the early days in the West, the Chinaman got around almost everywhere. And one old fellow pioneered out to the Old Faithful, and he set up a laundry, built a shack right over a hot pool, which where he thought it'd be a good place to turn out his laundry. Well, he started in, he had his clothes well soft soaped, and he had them in this hot pool, and he was sousing them around in good shape, when all at once the Chinaman pool began to play and blew the clothes, shack, Chinaman, and everything else off of the premises. And that was the first time that anybody knew that soaping a geyser would make it play. And that was a common practice in Yellowstone Park until it was prohibited by law. So I began to think that I'd like to go to the Yellowstone Park sometime, and while I was at the Crawford Notch in the White Mountains during the summer, as I remember, of 1907, I got acquainted with a tourist lady who had been out there and was acquainted. She knew what was going on there, and she told me what to do, who to write to. So I wrote to Yellowstone Park and about the possibility of coming out there next summer. And that winter I went to Almond, Florida, as I had been doing for 3 years or so. And in those days, you would all get on the steamer in New York City, and you'd go in groups. Your fare was paid, our fare was paid, and I remember that was my last winter there, so I was put in charge of the party of about 25. All that was that I was a kind of a senior person who told them what to do about their baggage and so forth. These parties were composed of men and women, or boys and girls, as we think now. But anyway, that winter at Almond, I still corresponded with Yellowstone Park, and about the middle of the winter, why, George Breck, who was the foreman of the transportation company, wrote to me, and he said, if you can drive stage in the White Mountains, he said, I guess you can here in Yellowstone Park, so come ahead and get here somewhere around June. So I began to make plans how to get there. Well, the first thing I did when the season was about to end in Almond, I went up to St. Augustine, and there was a circus wintering there by the name of Sun Brothers. So I joined up with that circus as a full-fledged circus wagon driver. Well, what you had to do to drive a wagon in a circus, I hauled about 3 wagons from the railroad to the lot, and from the lot back to the railroad when the circus knocked down, and that could be all the way from a half a dozen blocks to maybe a couple of miles. But my object was to work north and west. I knew about what the route of this little old circus was going to be, so I stayed with them until up through the south, and towards the west until we got up into somewhere in Ohio. I don't remember when. And then I severed my connections with the circus. One of my duties with the circus also was to drive the lion's cage in the parade, which was quite a little stunt itself. But that's another story. So I left the circus and I went to Minneapolis, Minnesota, with the intention of buying a ticket for Yellowstone, for Livingston, Montana, Yellowstone Park. And I was around there and I got acquainted with a bunch of characters who were in the process of shipping out to Montana. That was a common practice in those days. Somebody would want 10 or 15 or 20 men out west somewhere, and they'd send in there, and all you had to do was sign up to go to work, and they'd give you a ticket and let you ride on a car, which was like a day coach. So we started out, and by the time we got to the Dakotas, why, some of the boys begun to drop off. They'd gone as far as they wanted to. So I had declared that I was going on through to at least as far as Livingston, Montana. And so when one would drop off, he'd give his ticket to me, and then we come along to another station, somebody else wanted to get on, why, he'd just get on, and I'd give him a ticket. So we kept the squad up to fairly good strength till we got out there, and by the time we got to, I was supposed to go to Helena, Montana, and by the time we got to Livingston, why, they were just about all gone. And anyway, they didn't seem to care whether you went to work or not. I think the object was, in the Northern Pacific Railroad, they wanted to settle up the country, and that was a good way to do it. So that's that. Well, when I got to Livingston, Montana, why, didn't take me long to get a job at $30 a month. I'm not going to read this. I got a few notes here, though. And I soon got a job at $30 a month, which was the going wage in those days for a man anywhere in the West, Montana or any other place like that. So I stayed with this job until it was time to go to Yellowstone, and I'll never forget that day in June in 1908 when I got off of the train at Gardner, Montana, which had been loaded with a bunch of boys and girls who were going to Yellowstone Park for the summer. And I stepped up, come a great big stage drawn by 6 black horses, and I stepped up on the top seat of that stage and sat down beside the driver, who was Al McLaughlin, who later became a ranger in Yellowstone, and so far as I know is still living in Gardner, Montana. Well, I almost cleared myself right at the start, because when I stepped up on that stage, I was carrying a whipstick in my hand, a whalebone whipstock, which was least majesty in Yellowstone Park, because that was unthinkable to have a whalebone whipstock, because those stage drivers all got their own hickory sticks and worked them down very carefully with their own hands, scraped them down, sandpapered them. But anyway, I got along all right, and for some reason the old-timers took to me pretty well. I managed to get in good with the older hands first. And a few days after that, why, I was assigned 4 horses which had been caught up, and they were down in the corral. And by that time I'd acquired that name of White Mountain, which I have worn up there at least for something like 40 years. But I had assisted several of the other drivers to hitch up their teams, and so my time had come. You had your horses in the stall, all trimmed up, their fetlock trimmed off, their foretop trimmed off if you want to do that, and their fetlocks trimmed off if you get near enough to them to do it. And they were pretty full of vinegar, having been turned out on the range all winter. So I said I was ready to go, and there was always some excitement around there when the team was first hitched up in the spring, especially if it was a newcomer. The driver, you took no part in the harness, in the hitching up of your team, whatever. You just simply had the harness on them in the stalls. And at least 4 of the other drivers helped you hitch up. That is, first thing you did, you climbed up on the stage and got in the box seat on the right-hand side and put your foot on the brake, and they led the horses out and stood each one in his place. And the first thing they did, they hooked the lines together, of course, and handed them to you. You put them in your hand, and if you didn't put them in your hand in the proper manner, why, maybe you might just well get down off of the stage, because I've actually seen men that would come in and say they could drive stage, and the foreman would say, well, get up on there and let me see you take hold of it. And if he didn't take hold of those lines, he'd tell him, you get down off of there and beat it. We don't want you around here. So anyway, I knew how to do that, and they gave you the lines before a trace was hitched, and then the neck yoke was hitched, and then they hitched the traces, and you hollered, turn them loose if they hadn't jumped up in the air and fallen down and got all tangled up by that time. But out of there you went, and these fellows that had been helping you, they'd make a grand scrabble for the back part of the hurry-up wagon, which was really a broken down, cut down stage, like that one on top. So you were out there, and by the time you were well underway, well, at least one of these fellows had got up on the seat, had clambered up on the front seat there with you, so that if anything real bad happened, why, they could help you. But under no circumstances would anybody ever reach across and take a hold of the lines with you, because that would be just like reaching over and taking the hold of the wheel on an automobile. Only an automobile isn't quite as lively as a team. And about a mile up the road and back again would usually be enough so that the team knew the season was on again. And before the summer was over, I was an old hand and accepted on an equal footing by all of the old-timers, and even with the 6 horse stage drivers who were in the upper strata, so to speak, and the 2 horse drivers, or sorry drivers, who were always old men who were fading out of the picture, or youths who were trying to learn. So, about the middle of the summer, in August 23rd, I think it was, as we had left the Old Faithful. There was 8 stages in line, and we were driving up the Spring Creek Canyon. And at a point about 8 miles east of the Old Faithful, why, Fred Irwin was driving the stage in front of me. He was the leader that day. And I saw a fellow step out from behind a tree side of the road with a rifle. He had a white sack over his head. And he held up his gun, and of course Fred stopped. And By this time, my dudes were getting pretty excited, and they want to know what was going on. Well, I said, it's a holdup, and that's all there is to it, and you might just as well dig up your money because there's nothing you can do about it. And afterwards, Fred said that he said to him, he said, I want your money, and I want all you got, and I want it damn quick. And Fred thought he was talking to him, and he said, boy, partner, he said, I haven't got a cent. He said, I lost every cent that I've got in a poker game last night, which was the truth, and I know it. And he said, I don't want any of your money. He said, you're a working man like I am, but he said, these damn dudes have got to dig up. And he made a young fella get down off of the top of that, of Fred's stage and walk along in front of him and hold a sack. It was a white sack. I can see it right now, looking right down there. And so they begun to throw their money in the sack pretty good, and there was a young fella sitting on the front seat with me. Tippy want to hear that? And he reached in his inside pocket. He was a smart fellow, and he took out his pocketbook, and he took a $10 bill out of his pocketbook and put it back in his pocket. And so I kind of looked at him, and when the fellow come along, he reached out, and he just dropped that $10 bill on there. He was a regular Eastern dude. And that hold-up man looked at him, he said, is that all the money you've got? The fellow said, yes, sir. That's all I've got. He says, you get down off of that stage, and he said, if I find any more money on you, he said, I'm going to shoot you right here in the road. Well, you've all seen that fella get off of the stage. He fell off. And he come round in front of that fella, and the robber, he held his rifle, which was a .30-30 Winchester, I think, just like that. And he reached in his pocket with his left hand. He took out his pocketbook, and he opened it up, and there was plenty of bills in there. He throwed that down the sack. He said, you unmentionable word. He said, I told you I'd shoot you right here in the road, he said, and I ought to do it. And he said, if I catch anybody else holding out on me, I will. And wham, he hit him right over the head with the gun went off. Well, that fellow, he just fell right down, he got up, and he just started right down the road, just like that. The fellow said, come back here. He whirled around, and he come back just like he was pulled with a string, and he come back there. And so he says, you got any more money now? He said, no, that's all I've got. Well, he said, you get back in there. And he said, these other dudes better dig up. Boy, you ought to see him dig up then. He threw it in there. And I'm getting this to be a pretty long story. So he got back on the stage, and this fellow kept walking along in front of him, holding the sack. And when he got to the...
Go ahead, I'm listening.
Well, take a chair. When he got to the end of this line of stages, of our stages, he told this kid, he says, all right, he said, you get back on that stage. And then he shot his gun off in the air, and we went on. And that was all there was to it as far as we were concerned at that time. And there's nothing else more that matters to that. But on our return to Mammoth Hot Springs, 3 days later, we were ordered to report to the acting superintendent of the park, who was always a United States Army officer of cavalry in Yellowstone. And the man at that time was General S.B.M. Young, who was a major general and who was an old officer in the West. And he had been in Yellowstone in his younger days and was back there again as acting superintendent. And so we went over there to the office, and the chief civilian clerk in the office of the acting superintendent was Chester A. Lindsley. who was then and had been ever since about 1900 and would be until the end of the days of the cavalry in there, the chief civilian assistant to the for the Interior Department in Yellowstone Park. I guess you knew Mr. Lindsley.
Yes, sir.
After the Park Service came in, he became assistant superintendent, and later on he became the postmaster there. He and his wife are both dead, and his daughter is living in Yellowstone Park, and she's in bad shape. She's had a stroke not long ago, Peg Lindsley. Well, that is that. In Yellowstone, there was always a bunch of soldiers running around, and they were called swatties. I don't know why, and they were cordially hated by all the civilians. In order to keep out the poachers and to keep the soldiers in line, there was a small force of Yellowstone scouts there who were appointed by the Department of the Interior to keep the soldiers in line and also watch the boundary for poachers and attend to anything else that went on that the soldiers weren't qualified to handle. At that time, there were only three. There was Jim McBride, Harry Trishman, and Raymond Little. And in the fall, they usually put on a few extra to help out in somewhat the same way as we put on seasonal rangers in the national parks now. So one day in 1914, after I'd been in the park, as you'll see, I'd been in there 6 years. After coming from the upper park one day, why Jim McBride was waiting for me. And after I got my things taken care of, he come to see me, and he said, what about going on as a scout this fall? Well, after we visited a while, he said, well, let's go over and see Mr. Lindsley. So we went over there and we saw Mr. Lindsley, and the upshot of it was that I received my first appointment in the Interior Department, which I ever had, and it read September 2, 1914, Charles Smith of Maine, which was wrong, is hereby appointed a scout in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, at a salary of $3 per diem when actually employed. Appointee must furnish horse and equipment and maintain same if required. Signed, Bo Sweeney, Assistant Secretary, Department of the Interior, Washington. The next thing was to go before Judge Meldrum and take the oath of office. Where's John gone?
He'll be back there.
This would address John. The next thing was to go before Judge Meldrum, the United States Commissioner of Yellowstone Park, and be sworn in. And when Judge Meldrum gave you your oath of office, you knew that you were an honored officer in the government of the United States. There wasn't any question about it. And then I went to Gardner and got a bunch of supplies and unloaded them at the Transportation Company buildings. Of course, the Transportation Company were pretty good. After you quit in the fall or got through, you could stay there as long as you wanted to and sleep there, and they were pretty good to you. So I went down and got a bunch of supplies and unloaded them at the Transportation Company building. I borrowed a saddle horse from Joe Phillips, who was superintendent of the Yellowstone Park Transportation Company, who probably owned 1,000 head of horses at that time. And then I went over to the pack train, corral, and borrowed a mule from Sam Woodring, the government packmaster for the cavalry, and I was all set. Sam Woodring, as you old-timers know, later quit the Army and became a ranger, and then he became chief ranger in Yellowstone Park, and then after that he became superintendent of Grand Teton National Park when it was first established in 1919. Well, I had my mule and I had my horse, and I suppose I borrowed a saddle from Joe Phillips. And the next morning, Joe Phillips helped me pack my mule, and you should have seen the load. It piled up there like you couldn't reach over it. You had to throw a rope over it to tie it down. And I didn't get away from headquarters until noon. But anyway, I made it up through Snowshoe Pass and on out on Swan Lake Flat and made my first camp on Fawn Creek, which was a beautiful little creek way over towards getting pretty well over towards the Gallatin Mountains. And that evening, as I lay back on the slope of the hill with the grass knee-deep and plenty of water, and watched my horse and mule grazing along the creek, the elk bugling in the distance and the grouse hopping around, I thought truly that I was the Lord of all creation. I guess I was. Headquarters did not see me again until the 1st of December. But there was no poaching on the west boundary that fall, and the soldiers stationed at Gallatin and Riverside stations didn't see me either, unless I went in to draw oats for my mule. But I often saw them dashing past, however, as did every hunter that was anywhere along the line. And then they'd go back to their soldier station. They were through for the day. In those days, when a scout, when you went to a soldier station, you were welcome, of course. There couldn't be anything else, and you would sleep in the officers' quarters just like an officer. And you might pay as much as 12 cents a meal for your food while you were there. And that money would go to the soldiers to help them buy a few little delicacies, you know. And as you approached the station, you'd always whistle and make quite a lot of noise so that if they had any contraband there, why, they'd have a little chance to get it out of sight before you got there. That was cricket. But after you pulled out from the soldier station, why, they had no idea where you were, and they never did know where you were. So that's a little history about the soldier stations. I went up on the west boundary, right up on the top of the boundary, and camped on a little creek we called Bacon Rind Creek. And I watched the boundary as long as I could up there. Mighty near got snowed in, and then I worked down towards West Yellowstone to the lower country. And so along about the middle of November, I was in camp on Duck Creek. They call it Maple Creek in the park and Duck Creek outside. I was camped about a half a mile inside on Duck Creek, and my method was, whenever I went on the park line, I'd ride into Duck Creek and out on the line, and then I'd ride either north or south on the line wherever I wanted to go, or anywhere else. And when I came back to camp, why, I'd come back to Duck Creek again, and I'd ride up the creek, so that there was never a track, never a horse track coming into the trail along the park boundary. One day I was riding up north on the park boundary, and I saw a fellow come in with a pack animal and met him in the troll, and it was Jim McBride. He says, "Hello." I said, "Hello, how are you?" He said, "Fine." He said, "Where in hell are you camped?" I said, "Down here on Duck Creek." "Duck Creek, ha! Did you not camped on Duck Creek?" He said, "Me not know it." Well, I said, "Let's go back to camp. It's about time for supper anyway." So we went down to camp, and I turned off right up that creek and went about a half a mile up the creek and went into camp. Old Mac thought that was all right. He said, we haven't today. They would begin to get kind of word in headquarters. They hadn't heard anything from you. Said Lindsay said he knows everything's all right out here, but he said you better go out and see what White Mountain's doing out there. He might be dead by this time. So he stayed in camp there with me about a week, and Jim was a real woodsman. And so that was Jim McBride. Well, during 1915 and 1916, as a matter of confidence by Mr. Lindsley and the superintendent, why I kept my badge during those years with instructions to only use it in case of an emergency, in case anything happened that would give me a right to act as a peace officer. At the end of 1916, the cavalry was removed from Yellowstone, and the civilian ranger force was established. You see, that's just about the time the National Park Service was established. So you see, I was in the National Park Service before there ever was a National Park Service, by several years. And to read the record here, it says October 1, 1916, Charles J. Smith is appointed first-class park ranger at $1,200 per annum. They had two kinds of park rangers then. There were park rangers first class and park rangers. Park rangers first class got $100 a month, and the park rangers got, I think, 75. The idea was they'd work up to be a first-class park ranger. And the cavalry was called back again in the spring of 1917 on account of political reasons, and some of us old-timers were retained, and we went out on that summer using up about $15,000 in accumulated funds at Yellowstone on the trails, repairing the trails. We each had a trail crew out. And then the next record that there is 9/1/18. I again became a park ranger first class, and exactly 1 month later, the record reads 10/1/18, assistant chief ranger at $1,320. That was pretty good pay, you know, in those days. You get $1,320 a year, because if you got an increase of $100 a year over a long term of years, well, finally you began to get the money. But $1,320 was pretty good pay in those days, and there were four assistant chief park rangers appointed. James McBride, Harry Trishman, myself, and later on James Brooks. We all had the same rank and pay, but Jim McBride was acting chief park ranger. When the ranger force was first established, I had been stationed in the office as a sort of an assistant to Mr. Lindsley. I looked after some of the work that would ordinarily go on in the chief ranger's office. And during that time, I think it must have been in 1918, a young man come into the office to visit Mr. Lindsley by the name of Horace M. Albright, who was a young man who had been sent to Washington as a special assistant to the Secretary of the Interior, and when Stephen Mather was appointed the first director of the National Park Service, Horace M. Albright, was his assistant and always was his assistant until he became director himself. In my book, Horace Albright is tops in the National Park Service or anywhere else. And he's been a very dear friend of mine all these years. And I can't say too much about Horace Albright, the kind of a man he is and was. Looking back, I believe that the winter of 1918 was the worst that we as rangers in Yellowstone Park or anywhere else ever put in on the protection and feeding of elk. That was on the Garden of Flats. There's a picture at the top that I took right off of one of my wagon that I was driving while we were. That was a bitter winter, the worst one that nobody ever put in a worse winter than that. So, going along, to make a long story short, on December 29, 1920, I was appointed by promotion and transfer to the position of Chief Ranger at Grand Canyon National Park at $1,500 a year, which position I held until February 28, 1923, when I resigned. I was out of the service until Horace Albright found me teaching junior high school in San Bernardino, California in 1928. Several positions were mentioned, but none looked good until Petrified Forest came up, and that looked as though that would be a pretty good place to pioneer in. And I accepted the position there as custodian at $16.80 per annum, effective August 10, 1929. By 1937, this appointment read superintendent at $3,200, and on May the 1st, 1940, I entered on duty at Grand Teton National Park. And on July 1, 1943, I came here as superintendent of Zion and Bryce Canyon National Parks. The next entry in the record will read, faded away, April 30th, 1952. You know, an old ranger never dies. They just smell that way. My actual service will only amount to about 29 1/4 years. But I maintain that I have been a National Park man ever since that June day I stepped into Yellowstone National Park nearly 44 years ago at the age of 26. Now I could give you some stories here, but I don't think take the time. I could give you a picture of how the stages dashed in and out of Mammoth around 1908, and the tourists would get out and climb up on top, and they'd start out for the upper park, or 6-horse stages went back and forth from Gardner. I could describe a trip around the park with a stage which you started out, your normal trip took 5 days and a half, and if you had layovers who spent several days in one place, you might be gone 10 days. I could tell you about the dudes, the savages who were the stage drivers, and the heavers who were the waitresses. Some of the savages, or beaux as they were called sometimes, they had been there a long time. I knew men. You see, when I went to Yellowstone Park in 1908, it had only been 2 years since Teddy Roosevelt had come there to dedicate the big arch there, John, which you know about. So Teddy Roosevelt was a patron saint as well as anybody around the Yellowstone Park was known. The Yellowstone Park was young. I don't suppose that the first year that I went to Yellowstone Park, with all with the Yellowstone Park Transportation Company and the Wiley Way and all, I don't suppose there was over 25 or 30,000 people that went through Yellowstone Park in those years. If I had any of the old Yellowstone reports, I could look it up, but I'm sure that that as far back as 1908, there weren't over 25 or 30,000 people in Yellowstone in a whole year. What was the year of the San Francisco Fair? 1916, wasn't it? Or 15? 1915 was the first big year in Yellowstone. I imagine maybe they might have had 60,000 people then. That's a lot to haul in stages. There was Geyser Bob, Scotty, Casey Conahan. I think John knows him. He might still be alive up there. Van Tassel, Society Red. He's the fellow that visited me up here 2 summers ago. Doc Wilson, Cracker Johnson, Dad Kraft, Doc Daniels, and so forth. Sometimes they'd try to job a new driver who's going out. They'd tell him that first place he'd come to would be the Paul Parrott Spring. That was the Pollinary Spring, where you always stopped. And then one point they told him to always stop was the Shoeshine Point, which was Shoshone Point, and all such things as that. They could job anybody, they'd do it, and have a lot of fun. I could tell you about Scoy's stepfather and his dog. Guess I'll tell you that. Avon Scoy, and you know Avon, and his stepfather was named Johnson. And when I first went to the park, old man Johnson and his 2 boys, 2 stepsons, Avon and Scoy, were just growing up. They'd go around the park cleaning up the camp. And they had an Airedale dog. Went around with them, and old man Johnson, he was telling me about it once. He said they went to that damn bear come in the camp, he said, and I sick a dog on him. Go, take him. And he said, he chased that bear, he said, and the bear, he went a little right ways, and he turned around, he chased the dog, and he said, the damn dog, he come right back to me. And he said, I kept running, he said, and I run backwards, and I run to the hill, and he said, I fall, and I run right down the hill, he said, and the dog run right down the hill over me, and he said, I don't know where the bear did go. I haven't told you anything about the Grand Canyon, but my first trip to the north rim of the Grand Canyon was in 1921, and Uncle Jim Owens was still there. He had his cabin there, and that cabin he had all around it. He had a sign out on the trail, Uncle Jim Owens Camp. Cougars caught to order. That's all what said on the sign. And he had the feet of lions nailed up all about it. He had 300 or 400 lion's paws nailed up all around on that log cabin. I met Director Mather and Emerson Huff and their party on the North Rim in 1921 and came with them that fall over here to Zion and Cedar Breaks. I'll never forget that trip either. In 1922, again, I was sent over to the North Rim to meet President Carl Gray and his party, which consists of Dan Spencer from Salt Lake City, Sam Peck, the passenger traffic man from Los Angeles, and his party. That was in 1922. One high spot might be the climbing of the Grand Teton. On September 1, 1941, summit of 13,766 feet. Stand there and look off clear to the Gallatin Mountains in Yellowstone Park, where the Jackson Hole spread out like a carpet below. When I first went to the south rim of the Grand Canyon, it was in 1911. Went to work for the Fred Harvey Company. Again, driving dudes. got acquainted with old Cap Hance, who was still there. William Henry Jackson, the old photographer, is another man that I was privileged to meet when he was 98 years old. Others might be, I would include Randall Jones, who died here a few years ago. The best woodsman that I've ever been out with would probably be Harry Trishman. I think Harry Trishman was one of the best men he was a real mountain man. If you ever got up in the hills with Harry, you knew you were out with a mountain man, a man that knew his way around. I can say here that Zion is, with all due respect to Bryce, I can say that Zion is the climax as far as I'm concerned, and as far as sheer beauty is concerned, I think the most beautiful spot in the world. Well, that's about all, boys, unless we're in an intimate little group here. I might take my hair down a few minutes, if you bear with me. I have no special word of wisdom to impart. Usually when a fellow is going to leave a group, why, he thinks he's got to give them a lot of good advice. But I have no special word of wisdom to pass along to any of you, and I wouldn't if I could. But a person can't sever a labor of love extending over half of a lifetime without some feelings of affectionate regret. These experiences remain sweet in memory, although the poignant thought remains that there can be no more. The song is over, but the melody lingers on. The Yellowstone and the Tetons 30 or 40 years ago were to me all that I had ever expected the Old West to be. Some may think the Old West is still alive, but I know better. It's all in the books. You can search for it in the Virginian and the Covered Wagon, and our friend Charlie Kelly's got a little of it in his Outlaw Trail. But maybe I'm the one that's changed. We cannot hold the present. It slips through our grasping fingers as they try to hold it. But we find that our present finally becomes the stuff out of which our memories are made. The daydreams of the future are gone, but what has happened is mine, and nothing can take it away. The mind transmutes these reflections into treasures of gold, and I can claim some memories. At moments I've been a brother of the sun and of the wine. In solitude I have watched the moon rise over the forest and over the desert. I've seen the sun cast his early light on the shining mountains. And I have heard the wind coming from distant places, bringing the sound of myriads of waterfowl flying far out of my sight. I have heard the bugling of the majestic elk, and have seen 1,000-pound grizzlies fight to the death. I have watched the bighorns nonchalantly jump from crag to crag. I have stood with my friends on the 13,766-foot summit of the mighty Grand Teton. Jackson Hole spread out below like a carpet. I can say my Yellowstone, my Tetons, and my Zion. I can see in my mind's eye the sun set behind the shining mountains when they turn red from their tips to the blanket of evergreen below. And with this fading, a cold, brilliant star comes into being in the middle of a purple sky. When I first came to the far west, no man could starve. No man needed to be out of work, and no door was locked at night. I've lain down upon the earth and felt its breath. I have slept with Harry Trishman and Jim McBride in many a snowbank. Like all men who have lived in the West, I have seen vividness, and I know it. And I have long known myself to be a sentimentalist. But if any of you ever say that you heard me talk like this, I'll say you're crazy in the head.